Okay. Oh boy. I have the cats out today, so we'll see what happens. One of them is busy. Oh my goodness. We could we'll see what happens. I have left the cats out for today, and we'll see what happens, I guess. Okay, so today we are in the lifetime and the reign of Solomon, king of Israel, king over the most prosperous and peaceful time that Israel will ever experience in their history. I'm going to try to finish King Solomon's reign today. Oh boy, oh boy. I should have put the cats up. We could be, well, we might have a major interruption here at some point. We'll see. Oh boy, oh boy. I'm settled. I mean, I have to, for me to get settled with these cameras, like I'm settled. I'm packed in here pretty tightly. I'd rather not turn everything off and have to start all over again and deal with these cats, but I don't know. I'm flirting with catastrophe here, I'm afraid. 1 Kings 6. This is actually a pretty important verse here. 1 Kings 6. What in the... First Kings 6, verse 1. In the 480th year, after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. We have a very solid date here. In fact, 2 Chronicles, well, 2 Chronicles records it a little bit differently. We'll find that. We'll get to that verse in a bit. This is a very important date because we can now identify when the Exodus happens in relation to King Solomon's reign. It's the 4th year of King Solomon's reign, and it's the 480th year after they left Egypt. So if we can identify when the 4th year of Solomon's reign is, we can count backwards 480 years beyond that to get the date of the Exodus. And that's where we get the 1446 date for the Exodus, because we calculate Solomon's reign to 970 to 930 BC. And we have the 4th year of that reign be 966. So 480 years before that is 1446. That's a very solid date. Now, there are some people who will tell you, who will try to say the Exodus happened in the 1200s BC, about 200 years later. And they explain that we've got the chronology for the kings of Israel pretty well down. You know, after years and years and years and years of studying and being confused about, we'll get to the king years as we go. We're going to see a lot of king years as we go through the rest of the books of Kings. And for years and years and years, 2,200 years, from the 2nd century BC into the 20th century AD, people did not know how to calculate the reigns of these kings, as the data was given to us in these king books. But we did finally crack the code to a large degree in the 20th century, led mainly by a man named Edwin Thiele. We figured out more or less how to calculate the years of the Hebrew kings, and by comparing those years with cross-referenced Assyrian king years, and the Assyrian king years, some of them at least, could be dated specifically to astronomical events, eclipses and things like that can be calculated in hard, fixed dates. By comparing all of this, we can work out a chronology of the Hebrew kings pretty solidly all the way back to David. Hard to do that with Saul because we don't really know how long Saul reigned. We talked about that when we read through Saul. Saul's data formula is incomplete, or at least it follows a different formula than all the kings after him. So we really don't know how to calculate Saul's reign. But from David onward, we know how to calculate their reigns, and by, again, by figuring out the secret of the way the king books calculate the reigns, and comparing the reigns to the known links of the Assyrian kings and other kings of the nations around them, and then dating some of those kings at least, specifically to astronomical events that can be calculated, we can come up with a timeline, a chronology, which is the backbone of our historical study. So therefore, we can calculate Solomon's reign to being basically between 970 to 930 BC. We count down in the BC dates from the greater numbers to lesser numbers. And 400, so his fourth year would be 966, and 480 years before that is 1440. These dates are always a little approximate, okay? Because their calendars had, they started their calendars a different time of year than we did. They used a lunar calendar. Now they would, the lunar calendar and the solar calendar have different numbers of days in the year, and you have to come up with different ways of addressing that. There is no single best way to calculate a year. Some cultures over the years have calculated their years based on the moon, like Israel did. Some cultures have calculated based on the sun, like we do. Some cultures, like Egypt, even calculated based on stars. Egypt started its year in July when the star that we call Sirius, the dog star, was in a certain place in the sky. And every one of these methods has flaws, okay? For the solar calendar like we use, we need to add an extra day to our calendar every 4 years because it takes 365 and a quarter days for the planet to make a revolution around the sun. And if we didn't add another day to our calendar every 4 years, we would eventually, over the course of a long time, our calendars would get messed up. So that eventually, for example, January would be a summer month and July would be a winter month. Eventually. It would take a long time, but it would happen. With a lunar calendar, the moon takes 29 and a half days to make a revolution around the Earth. So some months are going to have 29 days and some months are going to have 30 days. Plus, you're going to eventually get off track when it comes to the sun. So your harvest festivals, for example, will someday be not in harvest season. Okay, you wait long enough without adjusting your calendars, and all of your dates, all of your festivals, all of your significant yearly events get messed up. With the star, Egypt had to. We call this is an extremely complicated topic that I'm not going to get into here. But basically, with Egypt and their calculations of their calendar based on the position of a star, that got messed up too. Now, it would take a long time in some of these cases for the effects to be known if your calendars are sliding every few years. But I'm just saying that there is no specific perfect way to calculate time. Because the stars, even though the sun and the moon and the stars, as we read back in Genesis, were given to us, at least for one thing, to cast light on the earth, and for another thing, to mark seasons and times and years. None of these do it quite so conveniently. There's always a little complication with each of these methods. So we can't be completely certain of the exact. That's why when you look at these timelines, you'll see a little bit of, like some people will say Solomon's reign is from 971 to 931. And his fourth year was 967, or whatever, I'm not worried about that. Okay, it's like if it's a half a year here or there, or a year here or there, like that's something that I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. But basically, Solomon's reign was from 970 to 930 BC. His fourth year then would be 966 BC, or maybe 965 or 967, just kind of depending on how the calendar falls. 480 years back from that is 1446 BC. That's when the Exodus happens. And we've talked about that before, but that's a very solid timeline that we can put a lot of confidence in. Some people will tell you the Exodus happened in the 1200s BC. And they do that, they get around, and that of course is about half of what it actually says here. Instead of it being 480 years, it's like 240 years. Now, the reason why they say this is because they come up with this very complicated calculation that, how does it work? What this is really saying isn't 480, like this 480 total isn't actually 480. It's 12 times 40. And they get that by saying there are 12 tribes of Israel, and there are 40 years in a generation. And for some reason, the author, whoever this person is that wrote this information down, was really trying to communicate that it was 12 times 40 in some hypothetical abstract way. I don't even know. To me, that's a leap. That's a loop. I mean, you have to really stretch to make that make sense. The only reason why you would say that is because you want to believe the Exodus happened in the 1200s BC. And the reason why you get yourself in that position is because you have your Egyptian chronology all messed up. I mean, we talked about this back when we looked at Egypt in the days of Moses. Our Egyptian chronology is messed up, in large part because back when we were first making it, when we first started studying Egypt, we were trying so hard at the time to find links in Egypt's record with Israel, in the Bible record, the Old Testament record. And so whenever they found anything that they thought was a link, they jumped to some conclusions that weren't accurate. And they based their timeline to a large degree on these conclusions, which ended up not being accurate. And so that leaves us with an Egyptian chronology that is totally messed up. But because we stake so much of our belief on that Egyptian chronology, which is inaccurate, we then go back and mess up the Hebrew chronology of the Old Testament. So everything is wrong. We'll talk about that back when we looked at the life of Moses. One of the specific things that we did back in the day was we equated, way back in the beginning of Exodus, Exodus 1 verse 11, when they're talking about the enslavement of the Israelites to do forced labor for Pharaoh, they say they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. Well, we saw that, Ramesses, and we assumed that had to be a reference to the most significant Pharaoh who had the name Ramesses, because we assumed that he was making them build a city that he named after himself. But that isn't accurate. You know, we didn't stop to consider that maybe that name Ramesses wasn't the original name written there at the time that text was originally written, and that it was an updated name that was copied over by a scribe at some later time to reflect what that town came to be known by hundreds of years after it was built, which is probably what happened. I'm sorry, I don't know what in the world this cat is doing. What are you doing, Luna? It's just, you've been up there many times. It's just a ceiling. You've seen that ceiling every day for the last 7 or so years. You're fine. You're fine, Cap. So that's just one example of a mistake we made. We rushed to conclusions about Ramesses, a pharaoh. There's actually a number of pharaohs that have the name Ramesses. But there's one that stands out from the rest. Ramesses the Great. I believe he's Ramesses the second pharaoh that had that name. He reigned for like 67 years. It was the longest reigning pharaoh of all of Egypt's history, one of the most powerful pharaohs. So we liked the romanticism of this pharaoh, this very powerful, long-reigning pharaoh, being the one who opposed Moses. So we basically decided we wanted him to be the pharaoh of the Exodus, or the feast of Pharaoh of the oppression. And so we calculated that as being when the Exodus happened, or that time frame. And we made mistakes again. None of that is accurate. Ramesses was not the pharaoh of the oppression. He was not the pharaoh of the Exodus. The store city that the Israelites built was not named Ramesses when they built it. So all of our conclusions that we drew from that were wrong. But rather than going back and trying to fix our conclusions, we just continue making more mistakes and trying to say things like this 480 years doesn't really mean 480 years in order to explain away the error of our conclusions. And that's just how we are. That is simply how human beings are. We see that going on today with COVID. You know, I'm speaking now at the end of January 31st, 2022. on the back half of the Omicron wave, and it's very apparent at this point that many, maybe actually probably all of the things that we believed about COVID were wrong. But rather than admit that, rather than accept that and say, hey, we were wrong, we need to rethink what we think about COVID because the things we've been thinking have not been accurate. Rather than saying that, we're continuing to double down, do all the same things that have been proven not to work, do all the same measures and all the same methods that have failed spectacularly up to this point to do anything to stop COVID. And we're doing that because we just cannot bring ourselves to admit that we were wrong. Can't do it. Cannot do it. And that is simply how we are. Okay, I read one verse. Next time, in the next video, I want to read more than that. That was an important verse, though. 1 Kings 6, verse 1 is an important verse.